I wonder how many of you consider yourselves to be a religious person. I heard a man say many years ago that he was at work and he was invited to a party with some of his co-workers, and he chose not to go to the party, and he said that the reason was because they're going to do a lot of drinking and partying, and he said, I didn't want to say it this way, but I had to say it this way for them to really understand what I was saying. He said, I'm a very religious person. Are you a religious person? Now, I looked up the definition of religion, and this is in the Webster Dictionary. It says the service and worship of God or the supernatural. So there's a lot of people who are religious. They worship, whether it be God, the God of the Bible, or another God that they worship. And I want to make it clear, there is one true God. There's a lot of false gods out there. But somebody who worships the true God or a false God or even the supernatural, it's through that worship that makes them a religious person. Now, when we look at the different religions, the different faiths, and even different churches, we see a lot of different examples of how people worship. One of the biggest, well-known faiths in the world, obviously, is the Roman Catholics. They would say that they are Christians because they are worshiping Christ. They're different than us in many ways. But one of the things that they do is they have a lot of traditional things, a lot of symbolic things that they do in their worship. We have a few symbolic things that we do as well. Baptism definitely being one of them. The Lord's Supper is another one. So these are traditions. They are actual actions that we do to worship our God. And that's a very, very common thing. But here's the deal, and I want to focus on this. Sometimes people trust so much in the actions, in the worship, that they forget or they neglect to actually look for a relationship with God. So there's a big difference between being religious and having a relationship with God, because you can go through all the motions all you want, but the God of this universe who created us does not just see our actions, but He sees us, who we truly are. He sees our heart. And God seeing our heart, He knows whether or not we have a love for Him, knows whether or not we have a relationship with Him. So be careful not to be so religious that you begin to worship religion. And I'm going to spell that out a little bit more here. In 1 Corinthians, Paul is addressing a church that goes through a lot of actions, but their motivations are wrong. There's a lot of things that the church in Corinth had done wrong, and one of the big things that they had done is they were mimicking some of the things that they had seen from other Christians, the things that they had seen from the apostles, and they were doing things out of order. And so Paul addresses this, and he says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity. You guys probably know very well that word charity can be translated love. That's how we would say it, if I have not love. So he says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and I have not love, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith. So he is saying, look at how religious I am. I do these religion things just perfect. I'm the one of the best examples on earth, quite frankly. Because he says he has the understanding of all mysteries, and he has the gift of prophecies and of knowledge. And though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains. Obviously referring back to something that Christ had said. But he is saying, I've got all of these things. I'm the total package in all of these things. If you want to look at an example of a truly religious person, clearly Paul is it. He has it down. And it says, and have not charity or love, I am nothing. So he is comparing his religion, his actions, his ability, comparing all of those things to love. And he's saying without love, none of this has any value at all whatsoever. So he is making it very clear that love is the key. So he says, and he has not love, I am nothing. And then he goes on, and though I bestow all of my goods to feed the poor, so he is saying I am sacrificing everything to take care of all the poor people, and though I give my body to be burned, so he's actually physically suffering for his testimony of Jesus Christ. You would think that that would be an example of somebody who truly is very religious, right? He is giving his body. He is suffering physical pain because of his testimony of Christ. He says, and even though I do that, he says, and have not charity or love, it profiteth me nothing. I will not stand before God, and God will say, I was well pleased with the fact that you were willing to be bruised and scarred and burnt. But he will say, I am well pleased by the love that you have. He says, it's not going to profit me anything if it's absent of love. Let's continue on. Another example in the Bible of being religious, and James addresses this very well. If you've not read the book of James, it's a very, very good book on your works. You are not saved by works. I want to be very clear on that. But works are important. Works is how you are a witness to others. Works are a demonstration of what's on the inside. So even though you are not saved by works, your works are important. And don't forget that. And he says pure religion. So we're talking about religion, an actual action of worshiping God. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. Now, we look at the last part of that verse, and that seems like a religious thing that's true across the board, that everybody who has a God that they believe in, that God has a set of rules. And that set of rules demonstrates how they are to live morally according to that faith. So we can look at Hindu religions, we can look at Muslim religions, we can look at all these different faiths, Buddhism and all these things, and you will see that there are a set of rules that you must follow to be truly moral. So unspotted from the world. You're not being affected by the world, but you are affecting the world. Now, what are the examples of that in our Christian faith? And obviously, we have lots of rules. As a matter of fact, if you go around and you talk to different churches, you're going to find a lot of different rules, a lot of different laws, if you would, a lot of different traditions on how to be unspotted. Some are very, very strict. Men are to wear long sleeves. Women are not to cut their hair. Don't watch TV. There's just all kinds of rules about how to not be spotted by the world. And I'm going to suggest to you that you focus on your relationship with God and allow the Holy Spirit to convict you on those things. But I want to focus on the first part, which is very plain, spelled out actions that we are to do. And it says that pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the fatherless. These would be orphans, or possibly in this scenario, we're talking about single mothers. The point is, they're not being cared for and provided for like those that do have a father. So at that time, if there was a child that was fatherless, that meant that they were incredibly poor and had much need. And then also widows. So it is saying that if you want to really be religious, you want to do something, that if you worship, if you serve the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Creator God, if you worship Him, if you want to demonstrate perfect religion, then what do? You spend hours in prayer. You spend hours studying the Scriptures. You actually suffer like Paul was talking about physically. No, he says the best thing you can do is seek out the most vulnerable, the least, and you bless them. That's very, very different than what we see from other faiths. God is telling you that if you want to be pleasing to Him, if you want to be religious, if you want to truly do something that honors and blesses Him, then you seek out the very least and you serve them. Jesus addressed this issue very well when He said, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was sick and you visited me. He laid this out because when Jesus said these things, they asked, when did we do these things? And He said, when you do this for the least of these, my people, you are doing it. It's as if you were doing it for me. I want to make something very, very clear, and this is something I find very interesting about the God that we serve. He wants you to be truly religious people, but not so much in your traditional worship of Him, which would be going through the motions, but He focuses on your love for each other. That's very, very different than what we see from other faiths. But be very careful, because if you become too religious with your traditions and you start to focus on worshiping traditions, you will lose sight of what's most important. Now, I want to bring up an example of some very, very religious people that witnessed firsthand the demonstration of Christ on how to worship and to serve the Father. Okay? Now let me repeat that. They witnessed firsthand Christ doing exactly the thing we just talked about, loving and serving the least of people. And they were very, very offended because it conflicted with their religion. Let's look at the Gospel of Mark in chapter 3. And it says, and he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand. So Christ would routinely go to the synagogue, and they were starting to really take notice of him. At this time, he had started in his ministry, and he comes across a man who has a withered hand. I don't know exactly what the condition is, but you can imagine that having two good hands would open many doors for this person to do more services, possibly making more money. But this is a huge handicap that he had suffered with for a long time. So Jesus enters into the synagogue, and he witnesses this man with a withered hand, and here's what the religious people do. And it says, and they watched him, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. So here's the thing. They recognized full well that Jesus Christ had the ability to heal him. This is just mind-blowing to me. This just boggles the mind that they knew that Jesus had some kind of an amazing supernatural power, something far beyond anything that they could do, something far beyond anything that anybody else had ever done, that they had witnessed. And they knew Jesus could heal him. But if Jesus did it on this day, it would go against their religion. They were putting their religion first and the people second. So Jesus walks in, sees a man with a withered hand. They know it's Jesus' nature to heal people. They know that it's within his ability, but they were ready if he did the wrong thing. It says, and he said unto the man which had the withered hand, stand forth. Jesus is about to do something amazing. And he saith unto them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil? Now here's the thing that I want you to recognize about what Christ is saying here. The God of this universe, the Creator God, Christ was there and created all things. We see this in the first chapter of John. He asks a question and he says it this way. He says, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil? He literally is saying to them, it would be evil if I seen his need and had the ability to bless him. I have the ability to make a difference. I have the ability to heal him. But if I chose to follow your religion, it would be evil. It would be evil of me to walk out the door knowing that I could have done something, but I chose to serve my religion or your religion instead. What they were doing, Christ himself was telling them that it was sinful. Their religion led them to do things that were despicable to God. Now, I have kind of a funny little illustration here that when I was out at Antioch Baptist Church, there was a deacon, and this deacon, he had a farm. He was a carpenter, and he lived out in an area where he was surrounded by Amish. And the Amish people, they take their religion very, very serious. As a matter of fact, I have seen few examples of people that are more serious about their religion than the Amish. But their religion is very, very confusing. One of the things is when the power grid came, they decided to stay out of the power grid, and that's a tradition that they continue to this day. And so they don't have electricity, or at least the ones in Seymour, in the area where we lived, they don't have electricity. One day, we're going to church, and I see an Amish, and he's on his buggy, and he's talking on a cell phone. And I'm like, I didn't know that Amish were allowed to talk on cell phones. Well, come to find out, they're allowed to talk on your cell phone, but they're not allowed to have their own. So clearly, this Amish man was talking on somebody else's cell phone. He thought it was evil of you to own a cell phone, but acceptable of him to borrow the cell phone. Well, so just very confusing in their faith and the laws that they keep. But this man, who lived right there in the middle of all these Amish people, he was constantly doing favors for the Amish people. All the luxuries in his life that he had, the Amish were benefiting from, but they could not have it themselves. And an example of that, it would be coming in and using his telephone. He would give them rides to places that they needed to go. He would do a lot of things for them. And then one day, he was hauling some material that could not get wet, and he had it on a flatbed truck, and he was needing to unload the material, and it started to pour down rain, and he asked the Amish men if they would help him unload the trailer. After he had done so many nice things for them, he asked them if they would help him unload the trailer. And they said, I'm sorry, we can't. Today is our Sabbath. Now wait a minute. This is the guy that they had gone to time and time again when they had a need. Now he has a need and he asks them for help. And they literally are saying to this man that they go to on a regular basis, they're saying, I can't help you because God would be offended if I did something on this day that is supposed to be devoted to Him. I find that fascinating because my Bible shows me time and time again, the more devoted you are to God, the more loving you are to each other, and the more service that you will do for each other. They had it so mixed up that they were literally doing something that I believe is sinful. And they were doing a sinful thing in service to their God. Denying the need of another individual that you could help, that you should help. But because you are religious, you would choose not to. I'm very grateful that our Savior is not like that He is doing good and doing right even on the Sabbath. But He asks the question, He saith unto them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil? To save life or to kill? But they held their peace. They didn't respond. They didn't know how to respond because it was a contradiction in their religion. When you have a lot of contradictions in your religion, then you should know that something's not right. Because there's a truth, there is one true truth, and then everything else is either opinions or false. So if there's contradictions in your religion, then you should look at the possibility of changing something about your religion. He says, and when they had looked around about, and when he had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their heart, he was upset when he saw how hateful and hard-hearted the religious people were. He saith unto the man, stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it out. Now this was a withered hand, a hand that he did not have much ability to move. And he stretches it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. So whether it be just in the hand, and here the Hebrew word can involve the wrist as well. So regardless of how bad it was, at the time, or when Christ told him to stretch it out, he was healed. He was restored. And now Jesus has done a miracle, a wonderful, wonderful thing on the Sabbath day. He offended the religious people. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. This is how offended they were that Jesus would do a good work on the Sabbath. Now he asked them a question. Is it lawful for me to do right on the Sabbath? Is it lawful for me to do something that I know I should? Is it lawful? Now, he wasn't talking about the Romans' law because they were under Roman rule at that time. The Romans wouldn't have any problem with that. He was talking about God's law. Am I breaking God's law by doing something that I know is the right thing to do on the Sabbath? And the very clear answer is no. You can't do any of this on the Sabbath because they were to neglect themselves and they were to neglect each other to focus on God. Well, they had it half right. We will discuss that here in a minute. But they decided that because he had healed somebody on the Sabbath, it was necessary that he would be destroyed. But Jesus withdrew himself with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him, and from Judea. So the Pharisees, the religious people, rejected Christ. They hated him to the point that they wanted to destroy him. But the more common people, and they were probably religious, many of them being good Jews, they had witnessed the miracles. They had witnessed his heart. They recognized what a great man he was, and they also were beginning to realize that this is Messiah. And they chose to follow him. And from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and from beyond Jordan, and they about Tyre and Sidon, a great multitude, when they had heard what great things he did, came unto him. And he spake to his disciples that a small ship should wait on him because of the multitude, lest they should throng him. Look at this. There were so many people that were ready to turn away from the religion of the Pharisees, that when Jesus would be near them, they would try to gather around him to the point that he was worried that they would literally crush him. That's how well received this man, this God, this Messiah was by the people. They were so excited to be in his presence. So he said, lest they should throng him. And he had healed many, insomuch that they pressed upon him to touch him, as many as had plagues. All the sick people especially wanted to be near him because he offered them something that the Pharisees could never offer. I find it amazing that when Jesus healed a man with leprosy, he told him to go to the temple and to offer the sacrifice that was part of the law because he had been healed of leprosy. Why is that? Because there was put in the law what to do when a person was healed of leprosy. The problem is the priests did not have the ability to heal somebody of leprosy, so they weren't used to taking up, or they weren't used to doing that sacrifice. Why? Because they had no true power and ability to accomplish anything great. They had religion. But Christ had done something that was so great that all the people with plagues and all the people would gather around him. They were, listen to this, excited to be in the presence of God. If you're a truly religious person and you get no joy out of your religion, then there's something wrong. Have you noticed that sometimes the most religious people also happen to be some of the most sour-faced, hard-hearted people? You should be receiving joy out of your relationship with God. You should joyfully serve and worship your God. And it says, and an unclean spirit, when they saw him, fell down before him and cried, saying, Thou art the Son of God. The demons had no problem recognizing who he was. To this day, they have no problem recognizing who he is. There was no doubt in the demon's mind that this is the Son of God. It was the Pharisees, the most religious people, that had witnessed the miracles, had heard the teaching time and time again. It was them that rejected him as the Son of God. But all of the sick, all of the needy, all of those that followed him, and even the demons all recognized who he was. And he straightly charged them that they should not speak, or that they should not make him known. Listen to this. He commanded them to not even speak that truth. His worship, his followers were not going to be these demons. It was going to be the broken and hurting people that would follow him into the wilderness. that would joyfully come in his presence, that would desperately try to be near him. Those are the ones that would praise him. Not the demons, and not the most religious people. I find it amazing that the God that we serve, the God of the Bible, wants to be praised, wants to be worshiped by the least of the people, by the hurting, broken, flawed people. And I find it amazing that it was the most religious people that turned their back on him. What is perfect religion? What is it that we should be doing and we should get right? Listen to this. In Mark chapter 12, and this is a man that had asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Because they were under the law. They were commanded to do things, and he wanted to know what was the greatest commandment. And Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. You can't serve and worship many gods. You cannot divide your worship between many gods. There is one God. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. So loving God is the most important of all the commandments, right? But then he goes on, and this had to be shocking to the person who had asked the question, the person who had gone through all the traditional religious things to please God, a person who thought that they were justified by their actions, heard this next part, and no doubt this was a new revelation to them. And the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. Why do I spend so much time talking about and focusing on this topic? Because quite frankly, a lot of times we get this wrong. I have a Wednesday night study group that I'm a part of, and it's a great little group, wonderful people. And we really get into some very interesting conversations. And one of the people in the group mentioned, and she's here, I'm going to talk about her, mentioned that when she was little, this preacher had preached a message, and he had left his cup on the pulpit. And just to be nice, she was going to go and get that cup off the pulpit and take it to the pastor. And she was told not to go up there. Don't you dare go up there. He will come back and get it, but you are not worthy. Now, it wasn't worded this way, but this was the point. Are not worthy to walk up and touch the pulpit. What? How silly we get with our traditions. As a matter of fact, the more traditions and laws and rules we have, quite frankly, we're more and more silly to this world. Because we are dividing our worship to God amongst all of our traditional things as well. We are recognizing man-made items made of wood. And we are giving them power through our worship of something that we consider to be supernatural. When you're doing that, you're literally dividing your worship. Because you are saying that is a holy item. Now, remember something. This pulpit right here, at one time, was a tree. A tree created by God. Worshiping the creation instead of the Creator is a sin. But imagining that this pastor, this preacher, somehow was so holy that he was worthy to touch the pulpit, but the child was not. That is truly disturbing to me. Because not only is that lifting the block of wood up as some kind of a holy God, but that is lifting the preacher up as some kind of a holy God as well, because he was found worthy to touch the holy pulpit. I want to make something very, very clear. There is nothing supernatural, holy, or wonderful about me. I am no more worthy to be in the presence of God. I am no more worthy of coming to Him and fellowshipping with Him. I am no more worthy than any of you. And it does not matter how many traditional religious things I do, they will not make me more worthy. If I spend more time reading my word, I become no more worthy of being in His presence. If I spend hours praying, I am no more worthy of being in His presence than you are. Why? Because the only thing that makes any of us holy is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the shed blood of Jesus Christ. And there's no religious thing that we can do that is more pleasing to God than this: sharing the love of Christ with others. So if you want to be right and pleasing to God, remember it's Christ that made you righteous, and Him alone. But if you want to do an action that is pleasing to God, love God with your whole heart, mind, body, and strength. But don't neglect to love each other as well. Amen. That's what God desires from us. Would you stand with me? Now, this is not a new concept that I'd be sharing with you at all, but I want you to focus on this idea that I am mentioning. I have seen too many religious people that spend so much time worshiping tradition. That's very, very true within the Baptist faith as well. That we get so stuck on so many traditions that we think that somehow they become holy. We put so much emphasis on the creation that we forget what is truly pleasing to the Creator. I want to encourage you today to look into your heart. Consider if there's some of these traditional things that are literally in the way of you serving God like you should. I heard it said this way by a pastor who was going into a new church. He said that he was going to start with doing some holy cow tipping. Well, that funny idea, holy cow, that's a real thing. The Hindu people believe that cows are holy. And so he said he was going to do some holy cow tipping. He was going to tip over some of the relationships, get them out of the way so that then the people could focus on God. Do you need to get some things out of the way so that you can focus on God? Consider that today.